following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. Hello, listeners around the world on radio, streaming, and podcast services. This is It's Not Therapy. I'm Liana, and I am not a therapist, but I am your source for navigating the madness of mental health, using my top 10 sayings for checking in with your best self. This week, we're talking about how to get good at feeling bad. What? Why would I want to do that, you may be asking? It's not clickbait. I swear. Hear me out. I've got Rutgers University researcher Richard Contrada, Ph.D. on later to talk about the benefits of negative emotions. But first, as usual, a look inside my very strange brain. You might be feeling bad listening to this right now. You might even feel exhausted from how bad you feel. These days, the news is like the four horsemen of the apocalypse: war, famine, pestilence, and death. A lot of us feel worse and behave worse than we have to, though. We're taught to repress, ignore, and deny negative emotions instead of seeing the purpose they bring to our lives. That causes us to blow up at people who aren't the problem, communicate poorly, push good people away, and generally get in our own way. When we're constantly scanning for danger, we often get false positives, and that results in mistakes we don't often get the chance to fix because the person we blew up at, especially if we blow up at them multiple times, ends up just being done with us. We like to think of ourselves as rational beings, and that often doesn't help very much when it comes to dealing with emotions. As much as we focus on logic in our society, smart people are logical, right? Well, smart people still have feelings, and emotions happen faster than cognitive thoughts. We're often not immediately aware of how they're impacting our decision making until we recognize emotions happen faster than cognitive thoughts. Think about the brainless ways that we attempt to console people. Oh, don't cry. Smile for me. I hate seeing you so upset. When we actually break down what these statements are saying, they're all asking the other person to consider our comfort when we say them more than their own emotional expressions. Then there are the messages that are even worse, telling people they're a downer or no fun to be around. And yeah, some people are downers and that they can find a black cloud in every single lining. But those people, more often than not, are just trying to seek, importance, seem like they're never wrong because they always find the bad thing, instead of people who are sincerely depressed. When you say to somebody, you're such a downer or you're no fun, you're treating somebody like an entertainment committee as opposed to a whole person that gets down sometimes. Here's the thing about people with depression. Most depressed people try very, very hard to mask as not depressed, which can make the depression worse because it's something they feel like they have to hide, and so they feel shame. They constantly feel like they're failing because they can't smile more. They can't just look on the bright side. They can't just get over it. So if a friend seems constantly down, ask them if they want some help strategizing improvements instead of just labeling them. Don't ask anyone to pretend everything is great when it's not. Top 10 phrase: ignoring negatives isn't being positive. The truth is that the more we fight feeling those negative emotions, the stronger they become. Whereas the more we seek to understand our negative emotions and validate that these negative emotions have a place, well, then we're more likely to process them and get back to being happy. And that idea of getting back to being happy is the first key to getting better at feeling bad. Everyone has a baseline level of happiness. Some of that is biochemical. Some of it is based on the patterns we learned growing up. Another piece is about our environment and whether or not it's validating the best parts of us instead of encouraging our worst inclinations. And then there's the psychological components that we can change within ourselves that shows like this can focus on. When you're feeling down, you have a choice in the story you tell yourself about those feelings. You can tell yourself that the bad feelings are temporary and you will feel good again eventually. Or you can treat the bad feelings as normal and the good times as fleeting, temporary, and ultimately a lie, distracting you from the core misery of your rotten existence. If the latter sounds more familiar as an internal monologue, you probably had at least one parent who modeled that type of thinking. Or you had a parent who was so afraid of their own feelings that they shut you down every time you tried to talk about your feelings. Most of the time, anyway. My biological father went through a lengthy self-help phase that did not help anyone at all. He'd read books by Wayne Dyer, who was one of the big self-help names at the time. Then he'd bellow at the top of his lungs that his children had to learn to control our emotions. Now, the irony of the contradiction between his demands and his own behavior would have been hilarious if the man wasn't just violent enough to be terrifying. Obviously, my birth father was not in control of his own emotions. So, ergo, he was in no position to lecture anyone else about emotional control. But the concept of emotional control is a lie. We can't control our emotions any more than we can stop a river with our bare hands. We can only control what we do and say as a result of our emotional states and build those stories, those narratives like the one I just gave you about feeling bad feelings that encourage the positive emotions and minimize the impact of the negative ones. Now, in order to do that, it's very important to acknowledge that we can't control our emotions. We have to acknowledge that we can't control our emotions if we want to control our actions when emotions run high. We also can't act in a controlled way if we're feeling something that we don't understand. If we spend our whole lives denying that we're afraid, sad, or angry because we've been taught that those emotions are inherently bad, then we won't react well when we're afraid, sad, or angry because we don't have the opportunity to develop strategies for dealing with the negative emotions we are denying we have. That may seem obvious to some people, but I see this breakdown a lot. It was something I had to face in myself. I spent so much time afraid that I couldn't recognize I was afraid. That was just normal. Fear was baseline. Naming and contextualizing your feelings is a learned skill that many families teach entirely wrong. Many peer groups teach entirely wrong. And pretty much every academic institution under the sun teaches this entirely wrong. There's a telltale sign when someone doesn't know how to name and contextualize their feelings. They misuse I feel statements to state opinions. Now, this isn't because they're trying to be manipulative. It's because they think they're talking about their feelings, but the statement contains 0% actual emotional content. Here's an example. I feel that you are wrong. I get this one so much, but that's the thing. I feel that you are wrong. Okay, I'm wrong. So what? People are wrong all the time. I feel that you are wrong gives me no information regarding how to proceed with the speaker in a more productive way. People are wrong all the time. What does it matter? Does the person feel accused? Does the person feel misunderstood? Is it hitting some button somehow? Who cares if someone's wrong? What's the feeling? Another one is, I feel that you attacked me. And that's not a feeling. I feel attacked is a feeling, but I feel that you attacked me is an accusation with a passive-aggressive twist. Feeling attacked and accusing someone attacking you are completely different things. How does that work? Well, we can all relate to feeling attacked, but we all also don't like to be accused of something we didn't do. So in a scenario where, say, someone's trying to help and they just misspeak, they don't know that something's going to land the way it did, and then they get accused of attacking, it makes it sound like they meant to do it, and it's an escalation of bad feelings instead of moving closer to a productive resolution. And this is the whole reason we teach I feel statements. We encourage people to use I feel statements not because we're tree-hugging hippies that like to go, and appropriate Easter traditions. We teach I feel statements to make communication clearer. I felt hurt when you told me my idea was stupid because I worked hard on it is much clearer than I feel you attacked my work. But this is where it gets tricky, right? Because so many people would rather die than admit to another person that they're hurt, scared, or feeling otherwise vulnerable. And that's due to shame. We've talked about shame before. We will talk about shame next week. Shame is the topic next week. We're going to stay on feeling bad feelings right now, getting good at it. If you clearly state an emotion and someone doesn't show empathy for that, that's a them problem, not a you problem. You can hold your head up high saying, I was honest. I said what was bothering me. That guy was a jerk. Or that woman dismissed me. Or, that non-binary person clearly wasn't in a place to receive the message. Okay. But that is no failing on your part. That's a them problem. But if you don't clearly express where you're coming from because you either don't have the emotional vocabulary or you don't have confidence or trust in your environment, that could be a you problem. It could be an environmental problem. Either way, it's time to reassess. If you have any questions, concerns, or comments about what I've said, Liana at nottherapyshow.com or nottherapyshow.com, the website, fill out the contact form, join my mailing list. While you're there, at Not Therapy Show on X, formerly known as Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. Anything at all, even if you're looking for some help matching with an appropriate type of therapist. I know a lot because I interview quite a few. Did a matchup just this week. I was very, very happy to assist with that. And this brings us to our first break. When we come back, Rutgers University researcher Richard Contrada, Ph.D., is going to talk to us about the positives of negatives, because ignoring negatives isn't being positive. Back in a bit on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and it's time for the interview, everybody's favorite part of the show, at least my favorite part of the show. We're talking one of my top 10 phrases, ignoring negatives isn't being positive, and I've got Richard Contrada, Ph.D. Richard is a professor in the Department of Psychology at Rutgers State University of New Jersey. Richard, thanks for coming on to talk about the positives of negatives.
It's good to be with you.
Now, you wrote an article in Psychology Today that I really connected to. One, because you talked about people saying, well, it's in our DNA and not everything in human nature is an adaptive trait in terms of Darwinism. But you argued that there are benefits on kind of sitting and dealing with negative feelings. So the first thing you talked about was anger. How can you argue that anger can be a positive force?
Well, anger is often a reaction to a perceived violation, something that the person finds to be a very important belief, even a moral belief. And so it's revealing of the person's, sort of morals. And if that's your anger that you're ruminating about, it's could be useful to take a deep dive into that principle or moral that you think was violated, that may have led to your emotion, which may not always be so clear to you in the moment.
Yeah, it does. Anger is a particular one that it does often take a bit to realize either why am I angry, or I'm not really angry. I'm angry because I don't want to feel sad. I don't want to feel scared. It's a sort of complex secondary emotion. But somewhere along the line, and it happened in my lifetime, when I was younger, there was this sense that anger was okay as long as you're not destructive about it. Now there seems to be this sense of it's never okay to get angry, that getting angry is you're doing something wrong somehow. Have you encountered this attitude as well? And how do you counter it?
It's happened, sure. Angry expressions can be ugly. And then the person on the other side is feeling angry or anxious or sad. So how it's all about actually, how you express it and what you do with it. I mean, that's the major theme. So you can err on either side. You could be too quick to dismiss the anger without examining it, and then you could just let it ride and get into all kinds of problems.
Yeah. Now you single out righteous anger as something that actually can have actively good effects, that when it's expressed appropriately, you specify. How do you appropriately express anger?
You see so much of this now, with social media and political punditry and all, where it's so destructive because people are demonizing the object of their anger. And I had a colleague who had a way of showing anger in his face without vocalizing it and without saying things that would be, inciting of another person's anger in response. And just that little bit of sort of measured expression of the disapproval, the anger, along with the right words. And it's really all about how you put it into language, as well as controlling the more automatic vocal and physical expressions.
Now, one of the things I find, for me at least, healthy anger was difficult, battling back from, a PTSD, being acutely symptomatic, and then spending a year battling back from that. One of the things for me with anger is, okay, I'm angry. I'm not going to do anything about it until I know why and until I have a plan what to do with it. But to me, even admitting to myself that I was angry took some practice. Oh, you're angry, you're bad, you're not being fair, you're not being sent, all this stuff that the more you fight these negative feelings, I find the stronger a hold they get over you. You're less in control, you're less able to catch it, recognize what you're feeling, and do something productive with it. So, you talk about looking beyond the immediate trigger and how to apply it to some worthy principle. What are some things people can do to start that process?
Well, you have to be in a place and at a time when you can be reflective. So it's really hard to do in the moment. So as you imply, you have to kind of wait and let it flow and run its course. They're passions, they're visceral, they have their own timeline, their own shelf life. So you have to get beyond that, and then you have to avoid the temptation to just dismiss it, because it's unpleasant to think about. I'm just going to put it out of my mind, and that can be just as impractical as, letting it control you and being too aggressive. So, you don't want to dismiss it, and you don't want to just let it control you, and you want to get in the middle there someplace.
Yeah, you never totally successfully dismiss it too, right? It ends up coming out at the wrong person. This isn't worth getting upset about, but you are still upset. And so instead of it being the person that actually did the behavior that caused you to feel that way, you take it out on a loved one, your spouse, your kid, a colleague who was a safer target. And that kind of gets into that idea of negative emotions as information. If you dismiss the information, logically, you dismiss a piece of data, you get less good results. So where is this kind of maladaption coming from, that emotions are information? We see this. So why do people dismiss them so often?
Well, it is because they're powerful, and because we're probably not as so effective, either in the home or in the classroom, or even in religious settings, perhaps, in teaching people the specific skills, not just the principle. Don't dismiss your anger is useless advice unless you tell the person how not to do it. And so, they call this procedural knowledge in cognitive psychology. Okay, tell me exactly how you do it. I suppose the people who've worked the most on this and have specific techniques are cognitive behavioral therapists who are trained in that approach. And there are good books and sources out there for getting very specific, even like homework assignments that help you to work with your anger or other negative emotions.
Now, why? You probably can't answer this. It's a big existential question, but what are some reasons that we got so bad at this as a culture? Because we weren't always as terrible at this as we are. There seems to be as streamlining when education and training became about facts and logic. I'm a Star Trek fan. The whole idea of a Vulcan being logical, meaning they had no emotions. It's not true. Spock always had emotions. Other Vulcans always had emotions. It was just a question of processing them. And I mean, the 60s Star Trek was pretty touchy-feely hippie. How do we go from that to where we are now, that negative emotions are a sign we're doing something wrong, and therefore this massive source of anxiety?
Well, I'm sure I don't know. It's always so hard to, do a causal analysis.
Yeah.
History is, not an experimental discipline, and I'm not a historian. But, one thing that comes to mind is technology. And it's so easy now to angrily express your, outrage with a click or press on your phone or what have you. And people who are the recipient of that, which happens more and more, don't like it. There's the history of political campaigns is interesting, because you have this occasion in which Ronald Reagan angrily complained, but in a controlled way, about the way they were conducting a debate during one of his campaigns. And that is thought to be a moment that he had that really turned a lot of people to support him. But now, like an angrily outraged politician, it's a dime a dozen. And I think, not to blame technology, because it's not the technology, it's how it's used, but certainly that's a part of it, I would say.
Well, it's interesting because you go back in history and go back to the advent of the printing press, when people could do these short little pamphlets relatively quickly. You saw a similar uptick in angry pamphleting, anonymous pamphlet writing that was horribly defamatory against some public figure, using facts that were absolutely not verifiable. Do our brains just get overloaded by information? And is this sort of angry cover response some sort of symptom of plain old overwhelm?
Well, yes, I do think that just the sheer amount of stimulation, it's not even always information, that bombards us, has all kinds of consequences. I remember Milgram had a film where he analyzed urban behavior in terms of how all the cognitive kind of input and overload may explain why people in cities at least are perceived to be colder and more distant and don't make eye contact. We're talking about this era where, books like Future Shock, are old. And, it's like always the case that this is like the worst time in history for whatever it is. And then it seems to get worse. So, yeah, it's difficult to unplug and control the input. And if you use mental resources to respond to it, or even just to take it in or try to take it in, those are mental resources you can't use in other ways.
Yeah, I mean, I noticed that from moving from the city out into the edge of the country. People do take more time with each other. They assume a sameness that they don't in the city, and that definitely brings your guard down. But the pace of life is also significantly slower, and that gets to this concept of rumination. And I'm going to let that percolate for a minute because we have to go to a break. When we come back, more with Rutgers University's Richard Contrada, Ph.D., talking about the positives of negatives, what to do with negative emotions, how they can be appropriate and productive. When we come back on It's Not Therapy, questions, concerns, comments, Liana at Not Therapy Show, nottherapyshow.com. Join our mailing list while you're there, or at Not Therapy Show on X, Instagram, and Threads. More than we come back on getting good at feeling bad on It's Not Therapy. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and we're still talking the positives of negatives, how to get better at feeling bad. And we're still in the interview. We're still talking to Rutgers University's Richard Contrada, Ph.D. And before the break, we got into broach the subject of rumination. And I'm very interested in your approach to this, because you treat things as sort of a neutral in terms of morality, that, going back to Aristotle and the immoral state, the amoral state, as opposed to the immoral or moral state. And you say things like shame and guilt can be just there. They're data. They're not something to run from, the same as anger. But you also talk about the concept of rumination and revealing a problem that you wouldn't recognize if you didn't take the time to sit in the guilt, to sit in the shame. And, we live in an age where the coffee table book talking point is shame bad, guilt bad. How does your area of research explain why ruminating on these deeply, deeply painful feelings can be beneficial?
Well, easier said than done.
Yeah.
Do as I say, don't do as I do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a challenge. Rumination is often quite automatic, and blends in with what are called automatic thoughts, usually negative thoughts, that are just really hard to control.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's something maybe that's aspirational. I don't have my own techniques, except this is a non-professional, for doing that. The name of my blog series is A Little Bit of Knowledge, but having now come across your material, I might have called it This Isn't Science. It's because I don't know that science has effective ways that many people can benefit from to control and take advantage of the rumination, because we'd all know about it if they did. So outside of cognitive behavioral therapy, which does address this, I'm not sure where the evidence is. I don't have my own evidence for a technique that would work. I could just give examples and personal anecdotes.
Yeah, it's really idiosyncratic, isn't it? And that's part of the sort of issue with the research. We see what happens, we observe the phenomenon, but then you get into the actual therapy part of it, and there is no one size fits all approach. There's nothing that's going to work for every single person. I know that actually sitting with the negative emotions, the embarrassment, the shame of things I did when I was symptomatic is a good motivator to do the work so that I stay asymptomatic. That's how it worked for me, but a lot of people really get lost in it. And we've sort of medicalized the whole process, haven't we? That intrusive thoughts, always bad, always sign of a problem. Anxiety, always bad. Feeling low mood. Oh, I have depression. How do you separate these you put it in very, very artistic language, morals, aesthetics, pleasures, fears, dreams, right? Life's meaning. How do we separate that from things that are actually disordered?
Well, we as individuals can try to take an attitude in which we sort of play the devil's advocate with ourselves.
Okay.
So that's using self-talk in a controlled way, and almost arguing with yourself or negotiating with yourself. Okay, I feel ashamed of something that happened, but argument's sake, should I? What what did happen, and is there another way to think about it? So entertaining propositions that are the opposite of your instinct, of your intuition, keeping a kind of open mind about it. But again, it's easier said than done. I don't know how to get people to do that except to advise them to try.
Yeah, so you're saying that the ability to perspective take, for, to use another terminology for it, indicates that this may be a healthy process as opposed to something that's having a negative impact on your life.
Yeah, and also how can I benefit? Even if I can't see a great, alternative explanation in which it's not terrible, you have these expressions, what's done is done. You do the best with what you've got. You've got lemons, right? We have all kinds, these kinds of idioms that encourage us to not only move past it after considering it, but make something good of it. Don't, fool me once, don't let it happen again.
Yeah. These adages can be really useful. I mean, the name of your blog, a little knowledge, ... is a dangerous thing. One of the things I hear from a lot of researchers is the more you learn, the more you realize what's unknown about the human brain and about human behavior. And have you found that to be true?
Oh yeah, it's something I don't like to write about because there is good, useful science out there that we want people to take advantage of and believe in. But there's an awful lot that isn't good. There's what people call a replication crisis, where research findings can't be reproduced. There's frank making up of data. There's people just motivated to believe their hypothesis, even unconsciously, and sort of favoring it in ways. And everything, that's interesting. I'll say everything, but most of what's interesting is preliminary. Here's a new finding. We don't know what it means. It's a new finding, and it may take years, even if it is a good finding, to nail it down and really flesh it out. So absolutely, yeah. There's all kinds of pitfalls if you take so-called scientific statements literally.
Yeah, I saw a headline the other day of the Mediterranean diet can reduce or prevent PTSD symptoms. Good Lord, if it were that easy. And you look at it, it's a study of 191 people. The cohort's very homogenous. So I I get why major news services run these things. People are interested. It gets clicks. It's a human interest story. But that can create a false certainty in a person of, oh, I don't have to do that hard rumination work. I don't have to challenge my thoughts. I can just eat a certain thing or take a certain drug or do some sort of avoidant behavior or replacing behavior, and it'll solve all my problems. We have seen again and again and again the science says that's not so, correct?
Yeah, it may be true under certain conditions for certain kinds of people on the average, but there's variability, there's different kinds of people, there's different kinds of circumstances. And what's really scary to me is when this gets into physical health and medical care. I just got a test result that said that my bone density is low. And I asked about, well, what does that mean? And what they're doing is they're comparing your bone density to healthy 20-year-old men.
Yes.
And I think, yep, okay. It's been a long time since I was a 20-year-old healthy man. So yeah, it's ubiquitous. And medical is a particularly dicey area because people want to believe it. We want to believe there's the correct answer and the correct treatment, but it's ubiquitous.
The challenge with psychology, especially in the areas of, stress and self-regulation, there's no blood test. There's no easy pass fail to determine whether something is good for somebody, whether something isn't. The negative physical response to stress, hits a point. Like you said, it's different for every single person, and different types of stress affect people differently. So what is a way that someone can check in and go, all right, this is just life. Into each life some rain must fall. And one is, okay, I can do better than this. There's a tool I'm missing.
Well, one set of tools that are worth people's looking into are stress management tools, which take the approach that stress is inevitable. I was once at a conference where the topic was introduced by saying everything in life is stressful and everything you do is coping. And there's a lot of truth to that. And so the question then can become, well, what can you do afterwards? And there are a lot of techniques out there. You could get handbooks, and they'll take you through how to reduce stress by working on your body, say progressive muscle relaxation, working with your mind, say mindful meditation, breathing exercises, and others. And while the science isn't definitive on some of those, and we know less about how they work when they work, that is not a barrier for it to work for you. You don't want to fool yourself into thinking it's working, but you can make things work for yourself that haven't been demonstrated fully, and sometimes things that look like they're really well demonstrated don't work for you. So it goes both ways.
Yeah. There's no easy answers. Richard Contrada, Ph.D., professor in the Department of Psychology at Rutgers. Richard, if people want it, you've got your blog, a little knowledge. Anywhere else people can check you out, a book, a website, anything like that?
Right now, no, it'd be the blog series.
All right. Check it out. I enjoyed it. I appreciate the way you broke down the issue. Richard, thank you for joining us on It's Not Therapy.
Thank you for having me.
When we come back, final thoughts dealing with that dreaded word, appropriate. What is an appropriate way to express negative emotions? It's not so simple. When we come back on It's Not Therapy, questions, concerns, comments, Liana at nottherapyshow.com. At nottherapyshow.com is the website. Fill out the contact form, join the mailing list, or Not Therapy Show on X, that's Twitter, Instagram, and Threads. Back in a bit. The following program is a peer-to-peer advice show and does not diagnose mental health conditions. If you're seeking social services, please call or text 211 or go to 211.ca. We're back on It's Not Therapy. I'm still Liana Kersner. I'm still not a therapist, and my talk with Richard brought up the thorny subject of appropriate behavior. Now, appropriate behavior is something I slow down on because I work with a lot of autistic adults. I need to do a whole episode on the concept of appropriate. How do you know if you're being appropriate? Appropriate is connected to expectations, and expectations constantly shift, which means appropriate is highly subjective, which is why we have things like the golden rule and my top 10 phrases. Things like people don't have to like your boundaries, but they do have to respect them are my way of assessing whether someone is behaving in a way I consider appropriate. I had a heartbreaking situation recently, literally lost sleep over it, where an autistic client of mine had an angry meltdown at a public online forum I was in charge of. The facilitators rightly checked him on a comment that wasn't appropriate. And he blew up and said a whole bunch of other inappropriate things. And he honestly did not understand why any of it wasn't appropriate, why none of it was appropriate. That was a double negative there. I spent a day and a half in messages and video chat trying to explain the issue to this poor guy, and I'm still not sure we got clarity because he thought the joke was fine and he was being censored, and he thought the whole thing was just a simple mistake instead of seeing the way that he spoke to the moderators as abusive, which to most people, yes, name calling, appearance-based attacks, abusive. His realm, normal, completely appropriate. Clearly, this client has been exposed to people who name call when they're angry. And so he's learned that name calling when you're angry is appropriate behavior. And this brings up the importance of having places and times to feel negative emotions that are considered appropriate times and places to feel negative emotions. Also, in order to get better at feeling bad emotions, we need to know how to seek out happier, more supportive environments where people will meet us where we are and not shame us for feeling beat up, so the negative feelings don't feel like they're going to go on forever and we just can't take feeling bad anymore. Now, many people stuck in trauma constantly test the people around them, and this is understandable, but there comes a point in time where people have every right not to consent to further testing. Many clients I work with are going through the process of pruning their friend groups because they feel like they're always the ones suggesting things to do, organizing get-togethers, and reaching out, and they're tired of being the one putting in the lion's share of the work. Constantly insisting that other people take the first risk because other people have hurt you in the past is a fast track to being a bad friend. If you're constantly sending out the message that you don't trust someone through these persistent loyalty tests, taking a little dig at them and then expecting them to be a bigger person to show that they're not going to snap at you, they're not going to abandon you. Guess what? That person is going to get the sense that you don't trust them and they're going to want less to do with you. Alternatives to these bad habits, these maladaptive self-defense mechanisms we learn early in life, take time to develop. And those early steps are really hard because you've got the process of adapting our behaviors that aren't helping us anymore. And then you have finding supportive environments. Both of these are trial and error. You got to try and it doesn't work. And then you got to try again. And that can be profoundly painful, which is where people like me come in. During the summer, I tried an experiment. I started some groups for people who had mental health issues that were not about their mental health issues. I knew what they were. I matched the people up, but these groups were about their art, writing, music, just being people. And guess what? It worked. The groups are supportive. They're still going on. Clients are seeing themselves as more than their illnesses, and they're able to open up bit by bit without fear of rejection or worrying about horrifying the whole room because everybody's got something. It's not therapy. It's not even art therapy. It's giving people a chance to be human in places where they know they'll be supportive when they aren't at their best, but where they're still encouraged to be their best, to do their best. And this is the missing piece. This was a missing piece for me when I was deep in trauma. I didn't know where to go to seek out good emotions without being treated as the sick one, the damaged one, the problem one, the one nobody wanted to be around, the one nobody wanted to work with, the broken one, the annoying one. It's essential that someone knows they can go somewhere and seek out good emotions. Knowing where to reach out for good feelings makes dealing with the bad feelings easier. That's what video games, music, certain comfort shows, Friends, the sitcom Friends, rest in peace Matthew Perry, is a big one for a lot of people. Sometimes talking about the bad stuff helps. But you can get lost in a constant churn of rumination. People are not their mental illnesses. And everyone needs times and spaces where they're treated like a cool person and not a sick person. So something as simple as a regular get-together where people know that everybody has some struggle. No one is 100%. Maybe, no one's totally doing great, right? Or some people have struggles, but they're doing good. Other people are really struggling and want to do better. But it's very important to have those regular get-togethers. We meet every 2 weeks, the groups I work with. It's very important that they have that. We used to meet every 3, and they're like, we want this more often. And it's so like, yeah, now they're meeting on their own, and that's amazing. Because they know, no matter how bad it gets, every 2 weeks, they have that safe place of good emotions. And it's not touchy-feely. Again, it's not tree-hugging. We affectionately grief each other about finishing books and not rewriting things, and we have our in-jokes, and it's rowdy, and it's, it's just good times. A few weeks ago, one of them says, this feels like real friends. And that both, what do you mean it feels like real friends? It is real friends, but also it made me happy, because that was the point. Something that seemingly simple, just knowing a good time is coming again, can be a game changer in dealing with the bad feelings, because that's what I talked about at the top of the show. It's, I'm feeling bad, I will feel good again, versus the narrative that happiness is fleeting and the bad always returns. Both are true, but you get to choose which one you focus on for your best self and your best mental health. Okay, that's our time. NotTherapyShow.com. Questions, comments, concerns, or Liana at NotTherapyShow to email me directly, or social media, Not Therapy Show on X, Instagram, and Threads. Again, next week we are going to be talking about shame, including sexual shame. Already got the guests lined up. Super excited. See you next week. Until then, you're crazy is only a problem if it's hurting you.